Perfect.
It's episode 53 of the Fintech Moshpit, and we have Michael Marsicano, CEO of Foundation for the Carolinas, to discuss COVID response funds, small business grants, and more. That is right, ladies and gentlemen. It is March 212th, I believe, is the date of 2020 right now. It's episode 53 of the Fintech Moshpit. It is this summer that just won't quite end. But here's a little treat for you right now. Our guest on today's program is none other than Michael Marsicano. He's the CEO of Foundation for the Carolinas, and just man about town. If you don't know him, it's designed that way. Michael, welcome to the program, my friend.
Thank you, Tark. I appreciate your invitation. It's a pleasure to join you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you join us because I've lived in Charlotte since '03. So I'm coming up on a couple years shy of my 2-decade mark. And you have been in that first decade, kind of this figure of intrigue and man behind the scenes. And then the second decade, as I got to know you and work with you a little closer, I realized you're involved in some pretty amazing stuff. Perhaps the first place to start is, what is Foundation for the Carolinas, and who are you actually? For all of those who've heard about you, heard about the organization, but maybe aren't exactly sure what all that means.
I appreciate that. That's where we'll begin, Tark, because there's not a great elevator speech for Foundation for the Carolinas. If you've received a scholarship from us as a student, you think we're a scholarship organization. If you're a nonprofit and you've received a grant, you think we're a grant-making organization. All of these things we are. If you come to our building, which has this great art collection someone gave us, you think we're a gallery, or maybe you've had a wedding there, you think we're an event space. So you know us by what you've touched, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify what we are. There are 3 types of foundations in America. They're corporate, you know what they are, Bank of America. There are the family foundations, like the Gates Foundation, which is an iconic family foundation. But the third foundation, which is actually less known around the country, are called community foundations. They're in the IRS tax code, they're public foundations. And what they really are co-op of foundations. It's all sorts of different types of funds. I kind of think of us as a center for philanthropy. If you're a family and want to have your foundation with us, you have it. We help you make grants. If you're a nonprofit, you can hold your endowment with us. If you're a corporation and you want to have a fund with us to help you with your corporate giving, we do that. And so it all rolls up into 3,000 funds. The assets in all those funds total about 2.5 billion. Those funds give out into the community about 250 million a year. And they're often replenished each year by between 300 and 400 million. And then in addition to that, we have some discretionary dollars that people have bequeathed us over time. And with those dollars, we do a lot of civic leadership work. So some folks know us for the affordable housing work, which we've worked with you, Tark, in the city council. Some folks know us for the Leading on Opportunity, economic mobility work. Some folks know us for the fact that we were the spearhead institution for the whole Levine Arts Campus on Tryon Street. A lot of people don't know that. So you're right, we do have our hands in a lot of different things. So I'd say philanthropy center and civic leadership would be our kind of 2 pillars.
How did it come about in Charlotte? Clearly, to have something like this, I can't imagine. There may be many across the United States or world, but there's probably not many that boast the assets under management that you just said at that size, of that impact. How does something like this come about in a city like Charlotte? And it clearly gives us a leg up.
Well, I think we're an extraordinarily generous community, so that's the first leg up. The conversation that we have about Charlotte having so much civic energy is true compared to other cities, and so the foundation was actually created in 1958. The first community foundation in the country was Cleveland in 1914. So we're fairly young in 1958, and we actually, Tark, interestingly enough, started by a $3,000 grant from United Way because they felt a community foundation should exist. And over time, with the generosity of this community, we are now the 6th largest in the country. We are the largest in the Southeast. We're double the size of Atlanta. And while the name Foundation for the Carolinas sounds like we're for both two states, we're actually not. We're really the Greater Charlotte Community Foundation, but you wouldn't tell Rock Hill and Salisbury that you were Greater Charlotte, much less Pineville or Matthews. So we're really misnamed, but we started in 58, and I think it's to the testimony of the generosity of this community that we are the largest in the Southeast and the 6th largest in the country.
It's like the Carolina Panthers, where it's a team of 2 states. However, only one state until recently has paid for everything.
Well, there you go. I'll use that analogy.
Bingo. And then last question on this is as I transition into the meat of why we wanted to talk to you, but we took the last Business Alliance inner city trip to Pittsburgh. And I think you and I haven't even had a chance to talk about this since that, and that was a while ago. I think it became very clear to me, the civic-minded kind of family foundation work that has occurred over Pittsburgh, and the lifespan of Pittsburgh really has really made the difference, both in the city they've become, but also in the challenges they've had to grapple with when the bottom fell out of the steel industry market and things like that. So clearly it's a really material thing to have something like this. And it makes the difference between, a top world-class city and a top world-class city that is resilient in challenging times.
I agree with you completely, Tark. I will say about Pittsburgh and Cleveland, I mentioned the Rust Belt cities made their wealth really in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And a lot of those foundations were created then. And frankly, they have kept those cities in the game in many ways as they work through being that Rust Belt stage. And Pittsburgh is a perfect example. You've got the Heinz endowments there. You have a lot of large family foundations. And you also have the Pittsburgh Community Foundation, which is a significant player as well. In Charlotte, our family foundations are still fairly nascent. We don't have foundations that have been created, very many, from people having passed away and left their wealth in a foundation. The Spangler Foundation is a great foundation, but that family's still with us, thankfully. And the Levine Foundation, that's still with us. They're still with us, thankfully. And those are all foundations that have been created, but someday in the distant future, those will be huge foundations in the way that you see Pittsburgh and Cleveland and other places. So we're as most things in the South, we are nascent in some of these things, and giving at huge levels is relatively recent in Charlotte, but it's robust.
To use a Charlotte analogy, then, while many of the older cities in the rest of the country are the South Parks of old money, we are the Ballantine of more new money. Is that correct?
That's a perfect. You're really good at analogies, Tark.
That's all I do. That's literally all I do. So let's transition into some of the more recent work of the foundation and of your partners. Clearly, COVID has been just an unprecedented time of impact. And if you think about that impact in terms of where it's been hardest hit, individuals and the assistance and help they need, small businesses and the assistance and help they need, or larger corporations and either the help they need or the help they want to give and they need help with, you have had your fingers in all of those pies, so to speak, in assisting and being a part of a solution for these unprecedented times to make sure, for our businesses locally, but also nationwide, we have the best odds of recovery, of thriving after this period. Started that first area, the individual, the COVID response fund. I remember having conversations with you. I mean, literally it felt like the beginning of March, right when this all was happening. It feels like a lifetime ago. Tell us all a little bit about that, but then how that's progressed over the last 4 months.
Well, first, I would want your viewers to know that this may not have come to fruition if it hadn't been for your help.
Oh, Michael, tell
Oh,
me more. No, my role was about that side.
I'm going to tell that story. So on the Friday before you and I talked on a Saturday morning, the United Way and the foundation got together and said, you know, this is going to be a disaster on individuals. People are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be food lines, you know, around the block. There's going to be people not being able to pay utility bills. We're going to need to prepare to do something big. Well, Saturday morning, I get this call from my council member, and he linked me with a very generous man named Doug Lebda, who is the CEO of Lending Tree, who had a similar idea. And he made that connection for the two of us. And after a weekend of talking it through with Doug and with Tark, we were before city council. A few days after that, the city council matched his $1 million gift by $1 million. And now, several weeks or a few months later, we're approaching 20 million. And so that's an example of the generosity. And the only other community that I know that's reached that height in a fund like this is Seattle, which of course has a lot of high tech wealth money. But their community has come up, their foundation is about at 20 million as well. So now the question has been, as the money's been so generous, what do we need? Where is the greatest amount of need? And we put together a citizen volunteer grants committee that's very representative of the community, Republican, Democrats, Black, white, you know, grassroots, corporate, to be able to review the applications that would come in. And we decided that three things: that citizens were in dire circumstances, that they were seeking greater help from the nonprofits. So yes, we have food banks, but now the food banks were having huge lines. The problem, though, was that the nonprofits were suffering from the COVID experience and had to work from home. And in the case of, let's take a food bank depends on volunteers to deliver food. Well, the volunteers didn't want to deliver food in case they got COVID. So a lot of these nonprofits had to completely retool how they went about doing things. In any event, Ed Peacock and Tanya Blackman are the two co-chairs of the committee, and they are allocating grants as a group of about 15 grants committee members every 3 weeks or so. And that was designed, Tark, to be able to watch the need and to move with the need. So for instance, March to May, we were looking at food, shelter, and emergency financial assistance. And so you would see large grants like to Second Harvest of 1.9 million, and to Loaves and Fishes of 460,000. The Salvation Army.
I was like,
shelter.
wow, that's generous,
Yeah.
even by your standards, Michael.
I get my M's and K's mixed up sometimes. And so we did a lot of work in that area. And then we began to see the community need move in May through July to, what do we do with all these children who are out of school? Their parents can't work because they have to take care of them. How do we place them in places? And so we started funding the YMCA and opening the Ys up again, who were closed, in order to have children's programming and money to Discovery Place. And then we began to learn that a lot of these situations needed to have the PPE equipment. So let's take a shelter. They have to pay $16,000 a day more than they used to have to sanitize over and over and over and over again, 4 and 5 times a day. Well, these nonprofit groups run on shoestrings. They don't have that kind of money. So the second phase was summer recreational educational work, workforce development, and healthcare. And we've had 700 applications to date. We have funded 254 grants totaling about 14 million. which means we have about 5 million left to deploy. The money has gone to groups in all the towns in the county. It is a a full county city program. But we've also looked into the grassroots community. Are there organizations on the ground that are getting to constituents in trouble that we didn't know about? And for instance, I didn't know about the Vietnamese Association, but they applied and they have a real access to that segment of our community. So we gave them money to do good work there. So now we have to move to the next phase, and the next phase we're really bracing for, Tark, and you know something about this because the city has been terrific in not cutting off water utilities to folks who couldn't pay their water bills. This next phase, we're going to be looking at rent evictions, foreclosures, and utility cutoffs, because while Duke Energy has been great not to cut off utilities, there's going to be a time where they have to turn it back on and all those bills are going to have to be paid. The state law right now is you can't evict people, but Tark, 1 in 4 apartment renters could not pay their rent in April. Well, once these policies of corporations change and once the state law is lifted, we're going to have an awful lot of people who are going to need utility assistance, rent assistance so they don't get evicted, foreclosures. We're also,
I mean, you have painted a picture that honestly, I didn't even fully comprehend the nimbleness of how this has flowed. I think that is impressive, very impressive. I guess my gut reaction right now is this next phase, while I entered this question of this interview with, wow, this is like literally 20 million. I've never seen something come together as fast as it did and grow. It seems like it won't even begin to impact the magnitude of where this is headed.
Tark, this worries me because I think in the subject areas and the nimbleness, as you've suggested, that we've moved so far. I mean, we've delivered the food and we're getting that done and the money's there. And so we could move on because we had enough money for that. This rent eviction foreclosure utility thing, it could be in the multi-millions of dollars. And we may only be able to put a small dent in that. Now, I don't know whether council, commissioners, the state, because this is not just a Charlotte problem, right? This is the whole state.
Country.
The whole country, actually, you're exactly right. The philanthropy sector is going to want to be there and maybe even more generous than they've been. But I think this is an issue that no one's really talking about because they don't know it's coming. We're doing research on the ground.
Or I think it's probably a mix of either they don't know it's coming, or if they have got caught in a glimpse of what it could be, it's like human condition of like, just block out something that is too challenging to wrap your mind around. And I will tell you this, as I just start to wrap my mind around some of what you've said, obviously we've been thinking about all of this with great intent, but the eviction piece, and I mean, before all of this, we had 24,000 plus crisis in affordable housing, as you know very well. And I mean, that was already getting worse year over year based on, even with the record breaking numbers of money we all have put into it. When I think about this, my gut reaction right now, I'd be interested in your response to this, is there's no amount of city, state, or federal dollars on their own in a silo that is going to solve this problem. It's just simply going to keep delaying the inevitable unless we figure out a way to use it in the form of the life rafts, the same upward mobility conversation that affordable housing is a tool. It is not an outcome or a solution in a broader upward mobility and equity conversation.
Tark, you're right on. This 20 million, and 20 million sounds like a lot of money, but to be truthful and to be honest with everybody, it is a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid. It's a COVID Band-Aid. And we're doing the best we can, but the longer term, bigger term issues that existed before COVID are only going to be exacerbated by COVID. And so I don't have the answers. I've got a good grasp of the problem, but we got a long road.
So let's transition to the second area where you guys are working. And I think it's a perfect transition because I've been of the mindset, and I'd be interested to know if you agree. You worked through the 07-08 crisis here in Charlotte as well. And you, at that time, had been a member of the team of architects who put together arguably Charlotte's largest and most impactful response fund, similar to this in history. And I think this one has now probably superseded that at this point. But that experience you had then, both during that time, but also the longer term, and now being able to look back, my view as well, sitting in, Wachovia at that time, and then Wells Fargo, was that the difference is the engine stalled of the car, the financial system, right? And we put countrywide, billions, if not trillions of dollars into it. And we jump-started. The underlying economy, the fuel, was actually relatively unscathed. It's the exact opposite now, where the engine is relatively working well. It's the fuel of the economy that has now stalled the car out. And jump-starting that car when the fuel, in my opinion, is workforce and small business primarily. I mean, it's unprecedented to even think of it. So I would transition from the last one of helping individuals through this time, and the point we kind of arrived at of the problem statement that is well understood is, us saying, oh, well, we'll save you for another month from eviction is just going to buy another month. How are we going to help them, thinking of them as workforce? I think that has to be a part of that solution. But then onto your second topic, the small business grants program. The small businesses need to make it out and through this. There are over 10,000 businesses in the city of Charlotte alone with 25 or less employees. And it's been predicted that over 20% of them may never open their doors again after this. Queen City Q, one of them. Elizabeth has had a few casualties, on and on. So tell everyone a little bit about this grant program and your involvement in it.
Okay, thank you, Tark. And you are right to make the comparison between 2008 and today, because in 2008, and by the way, that relief program was only 6 million, and we've raised 20 this time. That program was also helping individuals, but businesses were not going out of business. People were laid off, but the business wasn't necessarily going out of business. What we're facing now is very different, because, as you know, ultimately people were hired back once we got through that. Well, there may not be businesses to hire people back in this particular time frame. So you're right to make the very stark comparison between the two. Well, the small business grants program, to try to help keep businesses afloat, has its roots in the CARES Act. And of course, what's been widely publicized has been the PPP, right? The federal money that went through the banks mostly to help businesses that are larger than small business survive through it. But then there was money distributed to cities, and 30 million was given to the city council. And they decided that they wanted to try to help the small businesses, many of which didn't have the sophistication or frankly, the loaning relationships with the banks that it took to get through PPP. And that they wanted to give grants to small businesses. And we got into a conversation, and in the end, the city has contracted the foundation to do the grant making. And the grant making is being bucketed into two pots. One are what we're calling micro business grants. So for instance, for 5 employees or less, once we verify that you are a bona fide business, because we got to be careful on any of these things about fraud, right? We got to make sure it's getting to the people who really are the businesses. So we have all sorts of measures to assure that in the grants process. They can get $10,000, which isn't a lot, but for a nail salon, or a guy who's running a gym or a gal who's running a gym, that's can be a lot of money.
Or somebody who's even more so, like the people I think a lot of people don't think about as a small business. It could be somebody who rents a single stall at a salon. You know what I mean? And they have to pay. I mean, $10,000, while in a lot of our minds is like, what is that going to last? Like 30 minutes? For some of them, it could really be a difference maker.
It could absolutely be a difference maker. I think your point is, how long will it last? But it can give a pretty good run to try to figure out the longer term. Likewise, the group of 5 employees to 25 employees who can get up to $25,000. And I think the city council, you folks were really wise about this. You said, look, let's not have double dipping, at least at first. If a business got a PPP, at least for the moment, they've got some resources. But there's an awful lot of small businesses that didn't. And so right now, if you got a PPP, you're not eligible for this grants program. Now, we may come back to that if the need isn't as great as you and I both think it is in the small business area. We may decide that there are small businesses who got PPP but could still use some more funds. But right now, it's targeted to the folks that haven't gotten PPP. And so far, we've had a lot of education to do. We've opened up the Ys. We're using the furloughed Ys employees to help us out with this. So we're able to throw a little funds toward the Y to help them with their employment of folks that are furloughed and without pay, to help us with this, so that people can come to the Ys, learn how to fill out the grant application if they don't know how to do it, and have someone write with them who can help them fill the grant application out. So we're doing a lot of education, a lot of hand holding. Folks, a one-person shop doesn't know how to fill out a grant application. That's not what they do. So we're putting a lot of time and energy into assisting in education. And so far, it started a little slow as the word gets out, even though we've had 8,500 folks sign up to the webinars and things like that. We've had 2,000 submitted to date. Right now, of those 2,000, 257 of them have been assigned as eligible, which means that they meet all the criteria. And a lot of the 2,000 that have applied have already gotten PPP. So we're kind of bucketing them on the side to wait and see what we're going to do with those folks. And in the first round, we had 80 grants going to 80 businesses. And interesting, Tark, 73 of those were businesses under 5 employees. And only 7 were businesses that were between 5 and 25. And the federal program does not allow us to put the thumb on any type of constituent. So for instance, we can't say we'll be trying to help out minority and women-owned businesses more than a business that's not. But what's interesting is the data so far of those 80 grants, 52% are going to Black-owned businesses, 32% white, 8% Hispanic, 5% Asian, and 1% Native American. That's not by our choice. That's by the people that are applying. And I just think that's some very interesting statistics that I did not expect, which may mean that a lot of other constituents did get the PPP, while these constituents may not have. 60% of them are male-owned businesses and 40% are female-owned. But here again, we can't put the thumb on any of that. That's just the results of the first round. So the second round is decided today, and we'll be sending those checks out next week, and I'll let you know at the end of the day what the results are.
I can't wait to hear about that. Final question on both, kind of wrapping up this and the last program, individuals and small businesses. I say the same thing I said a minute ago, which is, when you think about 30 million here or 20 million there, they seem like huge numbers, record-breaking numbers. However, when you see the need, it makes you realize that we do not have the balance sheet to be able to attack this with dollars alone. And rather than spend harder, we need to figure out ways also to spend smarter. So while what we've talked about was either your individual work that for the individuals that occurred offline that we participated in, or this is in a phase called Survive in the city front, right? So there's a whole nother phase we've been working on in parallel called Thrive that does just that. How do we spend those dollars to achieve certain outcomes on behalf of groups of them rather than give them the money and have them do it? How do we retrain workforces, maybe that were in hospitality and tourism, into other things? How do we find small business acceleration opportunities for them to retool themselves? So while all that's coming, right, and I think in my mind, how I would answer this question I'm about to ask you is, that to me is how we ultimately scale and measure for the outcomes we're looking
Right.
for. This is inextricably linked there. My question to you is, whether it's individuals that we talked about or the small businesses, how do you, having had the experience of making it through the financial crisis and looking back, how do you think about the measurement of success, the measurement of achievement of outcomes with these record-breaking large funds, the amounts, the magnitude, the speed that they've been put together? How are you thinking about now that measurement?
Actually, this is a great question, and it does come back from learnings from what was the Critical Need Response Fund. Because after we stopped the bleeding with the 6 million, we raised 4 million, which was called the Catalyst Fund, to help. In this case, it was nonprofits. Help nonprofits retool themselves, re-engineering themselves, and actually there were a lot of mergers that came out of that money. That money was put toward not only re-engineering, retooling, but also just bona fide mergers that should have probably happened anyway. But
We had a huge challenge over the 2 decades I've been here in the nonprofit world of a great bunch of great-hearted people, where 6 organizations all huddle up and do the same thing, and then there's 3 gaps next to them on either side of stuff not being done.
Tark, here's how I say it, because we're on the same wavelength on that too. The IRS allows any 3 people to charter a nonprofit organization. And with the Civic Energy in Charlotte, all 3 people charter a nonprofit organization. So there is a lot of duplication of service. And that is in a tragedy, that's actually a positive byproduct, where you can stimulate mergers that wouldn't normally take place because money gets tight, and you can bring people to the table to collaborate more because money's tight. The United Way will tell you that the human services were never more collaborative and never more coordinated than in the Critical Need Response Fund, because they had to be. By human nature, we're not very good at this. But to your point about Thrive, the city does have another pool of money that they're looking to attack this very longer term issue. We do have a model right now that we're trying to show how this might be done. And that comes from the fact that Center City Partners, yours truly at the foundation, and the CEO, Darius, at Honeywell, he wanted to find a way, and Honeywell's now given 2 million. That's on top of the 19, 20 million we were talking about a minute ago. He wanted to fund businesses for the innovation and the re-engineering and the retooling that needs to be done for sustainability. And so he put up 2 million from Honeywell. Bank America and Duke Energy have joined him with about another 500,000. And the Center City Partners and Foundation of the Carolinas are collaborating together to run that grants program. And we'll get a lot of knowledge that I hope will help you, Tark, and the council in how they form this next phase. But you're right, it's a sequence. We're helping individuals when they're in dire need. We're then helping businesses so that they don't fall into being individuals in dire need. But that's also going to be short term. We need to now help those businesses not only not fall into dire need as individuals, but move on to the regeneration and retooling. And that's what I hope this model that we're experimenting with a small amount of money, but not insignificant. But those grants are higher, Tark. We're going up to 40,000, 50,000 with those grants, because it takes more to retool than to.
But I do think, and you've helped me kind of tease out how to say this across both the individuals and the small businesses. I think so far we've been working in parallel on both near-term crisis aversion tactics, 100%, and that's necessary, had to be done. That's, in my words, I'll say survive again, help them survive. Individuals survive, keep the lights on, right? Businesses, keep the lights on. If we do not successfully do what is probably the most difficult thing I can imagine in designing of this next phase, which is transition into the Thrive. And in my mind, Thrive is, how do you how do you tee up a life jacket that enables someone to become self-sufficient again,
Right.
whether it's a business or an individual, then we will always be chasing our tail on this one because the magnitude is so large. So on those individuals, if we don't transition them into retooling them for the new workforce of wherever they were disrupted, or the businesses retooling them for the post-COVID, model of whether it's retail or restaurants or whatever, I mean, that to me will make the difference when we look back 10 or 12 years from this crisis, as you are now in your work on that last one, if we're successful or not.
I agree completely. And I'm going to bet, which will be close to your heart. We've gotten 70 grants in right now for the Thrive, the Honeywell project with Center City Partners. And I'm going to bet that a lot of those are tech related.
I wouldn't doubt that.
I'm just going to bet because I don't think relatively small businesses will make it if they don't innovate and use technology to do it.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, I think that last point on this, when you think about the 10,000 plus small businesses in my day-to-day in this town, I spend a lot of time thinking about the technology companies, the fintech, but the broader tech. That's just the space I sit in. I've evolved in the last 4 months to spend way more time thinking about the Manolo's bakeries, right? Where it's real small, it's real specific, but it is part of the tapestry that creates Charlotte's culture and character and what it is. Or the old Mecklenburg Brewery on a larger scale, or, the list goes on. And for folks like that, Manolo's Bakery has transitioned from, he was innovating the whole time. He was like, all right, well, we'll do curbside pickup. And then he started delivery, right? But the problem is he's set up as a non-technical small business that has manually figured out how to pivot. He needs an e-commerce platform to take orders and help scale that out and continue him to move forward. So I think that is the next, those non-technical businesses that need to infuse technology in a way they haven't before, that is the ultimate outcome solution in my mind if we're going to be successful.
I agree. I'll come back and report on those grants for the innovation. Let you know if we're right.
Well, we have to have you back because you and I had planned to do a closing session that we have run out of time for, but we were going to talk Michael Marsicano on RNC, COVID response, protests and Black Lives Matter. You are both a individual with a risk profile where it's not great to maybe get you on my show and talk about those things, but you're also someone that never shies away from talking about them. So I was really looking forward to using this time, but we've run it all out talking about all the good programs that are going on. So we'll pass on that.
I'm going to take that as an invitation for me to come back.
Indeed, my friend. Michael Marsicano, CEO of Foundation for the Carolinas. Sir, we appreciate your work and we're lucky to have you around here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarek.
Talk to you next time.